Hi, my name is Eric Odom. I'm the principal broker for ROI Commercial Property Brokerage here in Tampa, Florida. Today we have with us James Moore for another Market Minute. And James is the Director of International Planning and Urban Design for HDR. HDR, for those that don't know, is one of the largest employee-owned architectural and engineering and construction service firms in the world, actually. And he also happens to sit on the chair of the Tampa Bay District Council of the Urban Land Institute. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about the 2012 summit that we just had in St. Pete? And you talked about there's three overriding points here, or sort of topics that you discussed that you thought were meaningful.
Well, this is the first time we've done this. We got all the district councils from the state of Florida together, and we said we're going to do a statewide sort of take on what's happening. And we wanted to reference a couple of existing documents, one of them being this What's Next, which has been put out nationally, which we'll talk about in more detail. And then a second document, which comes from about 5 or 6 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago, called Building Florida's Future, which was another ULI document that sort of looked at the regions of the state and what was happening.
Let's just back up a little bit. ULI, because this is the Urban Land Institute.
I
probably should have, it was my fault, I should have.
No, ULI is the Urban Land Institute. We're celebrating our 75th anniversary this year. About 30,000 members globally. Based out of Washington, D.C., membership-driven organization, really about research, education, outreach, about creating thriving, successful communities.
Gotcha.
And all that entails. So it's a wonderfully diverse, eclectic group of folks, all different aspects of the profession coming together and really sharing with each other. Obviously, there's networking and there's opportunities to do business, but it's really about learning about good communities, learning about what works, learning best practices, and then really coming back to your local communities and trying to implement those and bring that knowledge and expertise to bear on your local communities.
And so this is your first summit for Florida.
This is the first time we've done it for Florida. There are, ULI has 51 national district councils, which are councils ranging from about 100 people to a couple thousand people, really geographically based. Here in Florida we have 5, Southeast Florida, Central Florida, North Florida, Tampa Bay, and Southwest Florida. We're aware of each other, but we thought as part of the 75th celebration, what if we all got together and did something at a statewide level, sort of a ULI Florida, where are we going, what are the key issues, and how do we make things happen? And
you had former Governor Jeb Bush at this to give the inaugural speech.
Governor Bush came in and did the keynote on the second day. Obviously education is a passion of his, and he talked a little bit about that, but he's been traveling around a lot around the state, traveling around the country, and he highlighted a number of issues that I think you could say are probably systemic or structural issues that the state has to address. Some of them relate to educational issues. I mean, I think everyone recognizes that compared to a lot of our competing cities and competing states, our educational attainment levels are not as high as they are, and that's a big issue, particularly since the trend seems to be we're moving more towards a creative economy based on knowledge and information and creativity, as opposed to an industrial economy or a service economy. He talked about simple things. He said, look, hurricane season started last week. How many people have water and batteries in their house? And maybe 4 people in the room put up their hands. Perhaps humorous on the one hand, but it's an aspect. Are we truly prepared, not just for the negative things that could happen, the hurricanes or the storms or that sort of thing, but also are there positive things out there that we may not be prepared to take on? Infrastructure. He pointed to the fact that we underfund our infrastructure. I mean, historically the notion has been that, well, the next guy in the door will help pay for the infrastructure that I use, and so on and so on. Some people have said, well, there's another name for that. It's called a Ponzi scheme, and eventually they run out. It certainly seems like that happened a few years back here, where we really went stagnant. But realistically, we can't even be thinking in terms of rebuilding our old infrastructure or building post-war infrastructure. We have to be looking into the 21st century. What is this infrastructure of the 21st century? Innovation. I've heard some statistics, and I don't want to quote them because I'm not sure of their accuracy, but it seems like even the college grads that we have here who are moving into the sort of innovative or creative fields, the computer sciences and the engineering, a lot of them are leaving. So we've
got a big brain drain.
We got a brain drain, and we probably even have a deficit because we need more. We're growing some on our own, but they're not all staying here. So that's a huge issue, and I think he talked a little bit about some of the opportunities to overcome that. And then he pointed out that realistically, we don't do really good long-term planning here. We plan for political cycles, which are 2 years or 4 years. I mean, most of us recognize that a really interesting development project may take 4 years to permit, let alone get built and operational. You combine that with the fact that often the financial cycles for projects is in the 5 to 7 year range, and we're not thinking long-term. We're not thinking 20 years or 50 years, or the Japanese are notorious for thinking 100 years out. What will this be like in 100 years? We're looking 2 and 4 years, and what can you accomplish in that? So, I think the mayor gave, the governor gave a great talk. He's very upbeat, he's very positive, but it was a little bit like, guys, come on, we got to really get our act together and think these big issues through. And yes, things are a little down, but the opportunities are still there. We've got abundant natural resource. I mean, it's a great state. It's a beautiful state. We've got we've got the Gulf. We've got the Atlantic. We've got some phenomenal environmental aspects. We've got a lot of young people. We've got people who want to move here. So these are all good, positive things, but we're not really optimizing them.
Gotcha. And I was looking through the list of attendees, and the first thing that popped out to me after Governor Bush was, it seems like every major mayor of every major city in the state of Florida was there.
Well, we made a decision because we thought about it, and obviously you have someone like the governor, the former governor, who can really sort of paint a picture and look back historically and talk about it from the statewide point of view. But realistically, Florida is in fact a state of regions. And we don't really have regional governance in any form. We don't have that kind of approach that some cities do. In fact, it's not really, some communities do. In fact, in the United States, we don't really think too much in terms of regions. But we figured, well, in each of the regions, there is a key city, and the mayor, if we could get the mayor of that key city to come, talk a little bit about what he's doing in his city, but also talk about how things are going in his region. So we were very lucky. We had the mayor from Miami-Dade County. We had Mayor Buckhorn from here in Tampa. We had the mayor from Buddy Dyer from Orlando. Alvin Brown from Jacksonville to come and talk. And in their case, I mean, I think it went remarkably well because they were very at ease. They really talked amongst each other the way you would if you were sitting around over a glass of wine somewhere. Peter Rummel, who is the chair of ULI, the entire ULI, did a great job of sort of facilitating that, and they talked about, these are the issues we're bumping up against, these are some of the challenges, here's how we're thinking in terms of regional issues, here's where it would be nice if we could get a little bit, things to work a little better. But you got the sense that here are 4 professionals serious about what they're trying to do, seeing the bigger picture, and sort of sharing a little bit of ideas and best practices about how to do that.
I mean, if Urban Land Institute weren't there, how else would these guys really get together to discuss bigger regional issues? I mean,
there are entities that can have you do that. In fact, I know that the following week, many of them were in Orlando for the Conference of Mayors. But that's more of an internal.
Sure.
How do we work this out? How do you handle issues of budgets and staffing and that sort of thing? And this was deliberately done, not just that the 4 of them can talk amongst themselves and share some ideas, but that you had 350 people watching them and getting to hear what they were thinking and what they were saying. And because that 350 came, and for the most part, from those 4 regions, there was a little bit of takeaway right there. I mean, they knew the situations that were going on. Everyone I spoke to said that sort of sit down with the mayors went phenomenally well, high take-home value, certainly something that you would try to look to maybe repeat in the future, and maybe even build upon what they discussed in this particular case.
And I guess part of the outcome or part of the main topic of discussion was what's next.
Right.
And there was actually a whole panel, I guess, dedicated to discussion on what's next.
Right.
And that seemed like it was the meat of the conference.
Well, as I said, it builds upon a national initiative, ULI and the ULI Foundation. What's next? Question mark. Real estate in the new economy, and it's the first of at least 2 volumes. The second one may be called What's Next, period, as in we've sort of asked the question and now here's what we think we can see going forward. And Maureen McAvey, who is a ULI fellow and was one of the senior authors of this, came down, and she reported out on the issues that they came up against and some of the we'll call them facts at this point, but some of the topics that they addressed. And I think the biggest a point, and she made it right out of the box, and she reiterated it a number of times, is this is not just a cycle. This is a structural change. Things are different than they were 6 or 7 years ago. And if there are folks in the audience anticipating that we'll just get back to business as usual, they're probably going to wait a long time. And that, there's just so many factors came together. You could argue that pre-2004, the way we did business may have not been sustainable in the long term, but certainly in that period of 3 or 4 years before the collapse, things got a little crazy. And that's just, the engine was running sort of out of control, and to some degree we're now dealing with the burst bubble, the broken bubble that came after. She pointed out a number of issues, and they run the gamut from national issues. She reiterated a fact that the governor brought up, because it's not just the case that in Florida we're not as well educated as other parts of the country. As a country, we are not as well educated as some of our competing countries. And we just don't have the degree of credentialing that she mentioned. Canada, she mentioned Korea and Japan. They're better educated than we are. And if we believe that the economy is moving towards creativity and really intellect and sort of thought leadership, it helps to have a lot of really well-educated people as part of it. She talked about demographic changes. The fact that I think we all recognize that Gen Y is very unique and different in the way they approach life and jobs and family and issues than Gen X, or certainly than the baby boomers. There seems to be a trend, and it's probably a little early to call it a true trend, but the fact that they seem to be much more urban than their predecessors.
They don't drive.
They don't drive. They don't necessarily even want to have cars.
Right.
I mean, now I was told apocryphally by someone, or anecdotally by someone at the conference, that, well, they don't want to drive because then they'd have to stop tweeting. Perhaps, I don't know. I don't know if that's the case.
But the numbers are significant. I mean, the majority of 18-year-olds don't have licenses. I remember when I was 16 years old, the day of my birthday, I ran out to have my parents take me to the driver's license.
Absolutely. My parents were taking me because they were tired of driving me around, and the idea is that you would get out on your own. And obviously, the lack of desire to own a car and have a license plays well with the notion of a more urban lifestyle, because things are closer together. You can walk, you can ride your bike, you can use transit. So there's an issue there demographically. She pointed to the fact that demographically we're going back towards the extended family. Those of us in the baby boom generation, many of us have older parents who have health issues or financial issues they need to get involved. Some of us have children who have gone to school and have now found they don't have a job, and they may be still living at home. A substantial proportion of the folks between 18 and 25 live at home. So, and if you think about it, in many ways, the extended family was really the norm before the Second World War. I mean, people had relatives and cousins and grandparents and children living at home. And then the post-war period had shifted a little bit, but now we're moving back towards that. And obviously that has implications for how communities will do business, how they'll work.
Transportation.
Transportation is
Let's talk a little bit about transportation.
Well, as you know, and it's been quoted over and over, the Tampa Bay area, for example, is the only one of the top 30 largest metro areas in the country that does not have a rail-based transit system. There are initiatives afoot to make that happen, but part of the issue is clearly it's not simply about being able to take a train somewhere or a streetcar somewhere or a light rail, but all of those systems lend themselves to different development patterns. And the thing about rail-based transit is it lends itself to a fairly compact, mixed-use, efficient, walkable transit type of development called transit-oriented development. And it's very clear where that will occur. It'll occur where the train line goes and where the station areas are. And so what you have is a situation where if you wish to live in that type of environment, whether you're a 22-year-old looking to save some money or you're an older person looking to avoid having to drive, there are opportunities to live in those. And then if you're, average family with a couple kids and middle age, you can live in a suburban single-family home. I mean, the option is always there. At this point, we don't have the option for TOD because we don't have the T. Mm-hmm. And that's a big issue. And as we've all seen, Dallas and Charlotte and Phoenix and Portland, Salt Lake City, they're all looking to reinforce, build, and expand their transit systems.
And not just rail, but bus systems.
Bus systems, it's about making things easier to bike.
And Hart, you see what's happening locally. Hart seems to be taking steps back every day.
I mean, one can't necessarily argue with the fact that it's costing money to run these systems, and if they're underfunded, you have to make some decisions. Clearly, if you cut the system funding back, you cut the system back, and then the ridership will decline, and you sort of go into a little bit of a death spiral. But on the other hand, we also are very dispersed. It's hard to put together a system when the centers are fairly far apart and the people live in a fairly dispersed area. One of the benefits of a rail-based system, although you could argue maybe even bus rapid transit, is that it tells you this is where the decisions to develop slightly more intensely will take place, and so you may end up with a spine of more intense development that can be surrounded by a more dispersed development. So you actually get the best of both worlds.
Well, let's talk about, because all this sort of comes down to one of the central points is the competitiveness of Florida. And also a move towards regionality, it seems, or at least regional cooperation to try to make us more competitive. Can you talk a little bit about how that was discussed there?
Sure. Well, you know, as I think the gist of it, part of the idea of competitiveness, part of it relates to the educational quality of the potential workforce. And going forward, you want a high quality, well-educated workforce. Now you could say, well, that's fine, there are colleges graduating people all over the country, we can just induce them to come here. But they are also looking for things. They're looking for a place where they can live without a car. They're looking for a place where there's access to lots of creative opportunities. They're looking for maybe a little bit more of an urban setting. And right now, there are very few places in Florida that offer that. And in the Bay Area, we're probably a little bit behind the curve. And so, you know, people they're moving to Charlotte, or they're moving to Dallas, or they're moving to Austin, or they're moving to Chicago and New York. I mean, they're moving to places that have a little bit of an advantage in some of these areas and are building on it. And we're falling further behind, even though arguably we're getting better, you know, over time, but there's a lot of competition. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting is, you know, folks point to when they say, well, you know, man, Detroit, I wouldn't want to be Detroit, or Cleveland, look at that. Both of those cities are experiencing some significant revitalization and some, you know, rejuvenation in their downtown, and a lot of it is driven by younger people. Because they can get in, it's affordable, they meet others, they have some opportunities to do some things, and easy access to entry there.
Well, how are we stacking up against the folks that really our peer group, like Charlotte, for example?
You know, I don't happen to have the numbers in front of me, but I can tell you that certainly the Research Triangle area is absorbing smart people all the time. ULI just had its meeting up in Charlotte, and they've done some really amazing things with their downtown. You know, their rail system is absolutely part and parcel. They've got some very interesting residential options in their downtown. You know, former Mayor McCrory is very fond of saying that he got to build Tampa's light rail system back in 7 or 8, 9 years ago, when we were unable to get the money together to do it, and the money went to Charlotte instead, and now they have the beginning of a system. You know, I think that part of it comes down to leadership. You know, this is not, as we were saying earlier, great cities, great communities don't just happen by accident. Someone has to be pushing them in a direction. There has to be some sort of an overarching vision, and then beyond that, there has to be sort of a willingness to move and do the small things that make it take place. Now, in that respect, the Bay Area actually does have a vision. 2007, we put together an event called Reality Check, and it had about 330 leaders from around the region, 7-county region, get together, spend a day with us, talk about where they might put future development, what some of the key issues were. The Tampa Bay Regional Partnership followed that up with an enormous amount of one-on-one and small group interviews. They churned some of those data. They said, well, here are 4 possible futures, business as usual, some sort of an amalgam, all the way down to no development will take place on greenfield land going forward. Sort of the two extremes, but by and large, the consensus normed on one of those, which is built around transit, built around densification, it's built around preservation of as much open space as possible. And that vision, that sort of regional vision was taken out, and people sort of said, yeah, that looks good, let's figure out how to do that. Now, that's the stage we're in now. How do we actually make that happen? That was done on a regional basis on maps that had no political boundaries on them. The idea of regionalism, we're all in this together. But realistically, we live in political jurisdictions. We live in areas where there are concerns about taxes and concerns about infrastructure. So the challenge going forward is how do you make that take place? And obviously, just as we were starting the process, the economy was starting to crater. So it's unfair, I think, to say that the Tampa Bay area doesn't have a vision. I mean, it really does. It's become a group called One Bay, which sort of maintains the vision. It's ULI and Swift Mud and the Tampa Bay Partnership and a group of other sort of overarching regional entities. The challenge now is how do we implement the vision? How do we begin to make that happen? And that's a big challenge. But again, the beauty of a group like ULI is we have members from all the different jurisdictions who are involved. We know a lot of the players. And in many ways, because we think regionally, because the vision is regional, it's an opportunity to sort of show how you can take sort of a 30,000-foot regional vision and say, okay, you live in this little community. Here's how that might impact you. You live over here. Here's the potential impact for you. And sort of keep everyone aware that, yes, while you may live in a small jurisdiction or you live in one particular area of the region, this is the implications regionally. I think it's a ongoing education outreach, keep people aware of what the issues are.
Well, I mean, it sounds like it was a great conference. I mean, to have the opportunity, the 75 years have been in existence, and really to have the first, Florida Summit, I think this is a great accomplishment, and obviously a lot came out of it, and points to discuss going forward. Now, if you were to, all the things that we've discussed, is there another overriding point that you would like to make about the summit that you'd like to share with us?
Sure. I think it's a couple things. As has been mentioned, ULI is a global organization, but very, very strong at the national level here in North America. Does a spring conference and a fall conference, and a lot of people go to those, and they last 2 or 3, sometimes even 4 days. A lot of opportunities to work together with professional colleagues, get to know people, and some of it's talking about business opportunities, some of it's just transfer of knowledge, and some of it is really the case you build up friendships at a national scale. But not everyone goes to those. I mean, we have 30,000 members and you might get 6. So there's 24,000 members who don't go to one of those conferences. Well, here was an opportunity to replicate that experience at the statewide scale. And I would say that probably a significant percentage of the people who came probably do not attend a lot of the national conferences. So they were able to get, in a somewhat smaller scale version, that same sense of meeting people from around the state, getting to talk to people about maybe potential work opportunities or business collaboration opportunities, but also just people who have similar interests, begin to get some connections, and so you can say, hey, I can give this guy a call. I met him at the ULI thing, and maybe he can tell me what's happening in that situation. ULI nationally or globally also has what are called product councils, which is district councils are based around geography, product councils are based around topics. So they have product councils for, say, multifamily housing or inner city development or master plan communities or sustainability. And the people, they're limited to between 50 and 60 people on each council, and they're drawn from really all over the world, but predominantly throughout North America. So you could be sitting next to someone from Denver and talking about an issue, and that becomes a reference for you. Well, part of what we're trying to do at the statewide level is create statewide product councils. And we had a preliminary discussion about it. Some ideas and topics came up. That will be followed up as we move forward. But here's a chance to say, perhaps for a day each year, 50 people who are interested in housing or interested in sustainability or interested in, say, public-private partnerships can get together for a day, look at case studies, talk about issues. So we're replicating the benefit of the national experience, but at the statewide level.
Gotcha. James, thanks so much for joining us today. I just really appreciate your time. Wrapping up the 2012 Florida Urban Land Institute Summit, first one of its kind, and appreciate your time today.
I appreciate you having me. We had a lot of fun putting the summit together. Hopefully it's the first of a long line of them, but we'll keep you in touch. And
absolutely. Thanks again.